I still remember that night like it happened yesterday. Even though it's been 3 years now, I was hauling a load of electronics from Phoenix to Denver, running behind schedule because of a blown tire outside Flagstaff. My dispatcher was breathing down my neck about the delivery time, so I decided to take what looked like a shortcut on my GPS to make up some time. Big mistake. The route showed up as this unmarked county road that was supposed to cut about 40 miles off my trip, and being the stubborn fool I am, I figured it was worth the risk. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, been down every kind of road you can imagine, from mountain passes to desert highways, but nothing prepared me for what I found that night. The road started normal enough, just your typical 2-lane. Blacktop cutting through Arizona desert, the kind I'd driven 1,000 times before. My headlights were cutting through the darkness, and I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show keeping me company. Everything seemed fine for the first 20 minutes or so, but then things started getting weird. The road just kept going straight, no curves, no hills, no nothing. I mean, I've driven through some pretty desolate areas before, but this was different. There were no mile markers, no signs, no reflectors on the guardrails. Hell, there weren't even any guardrails. Just this perfectly straight stretch of asphalt disappearing into my headlights like it went on forever. I kept checking my GPS, but the thing was acting up, showing my location as just a blue dot on a blank screen with no road markings or landmarks around it. The radio started getting staticky too, losing the talk show and picking up nothing but white noise and occasional bursts of what sounded like old country music from decades ago. I tried switching stations, but every frequency was either dead air or that same crackling static. My CB radio wasn't picking up any chatter either, which was really strange because truckers are always yakking on the CB, especially on the night runs. It was like I'd driven into some kind of dead zone where nothing electronic worked right. That's when I noticed the landscape starting to change in ways that didn't make sense. The desert scrub and cacti I'd been seeing gradually gave way to these twisted, gnarled trees that looked like they'd been dead for years. But here's the thing. I know Arizona desert pretty well, and these weren't the kind of trees you see out there. They looked more like something you'd find in a swamp or maybe some old horror movie, all black and skeletal against the night sky. The ground around them seemed different too, darker somehow, like the dirt had been burned or poisoned. I kept telling myself it was just the headlights playing tricks on me, that I was tired and seeing things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. The air coming through my vents started smelling strange too. Not like desert air, but musty and rotten, like something had died and been left to rot in the sun for weeks. I cranked up the AC and switched to recirculated air, but that smell seemed to seep in anyway, after what felt like another hour of driving. Though my clock seemed to have stopped working too, I started seeing shapes in the distance. At first, I thought they might be other vehicles, maybe broken down on the shoulder, which would have been a relief because it would mean I wasn't completely alone on this godforsaken road. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. These weren't just broken down vehicles. They were trucks, big rigs like mine, but they looked like they'd been sitting there for years. The first one I passed was an old Peterbilt, probably from the 80s, sitting at an angle like the driver had just pulled over and stopped. The trailer was still attached, but the whole thing was covered in rust and what looked like decades of dirt and grime. I slowed down to get a better look, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure still sitting in the driver's seat, but it wasn't moving. Even from my cab, I could tell it wasn't right. The shape was too thin, too still, like it had been there way too long. I should have turned around right then, but I couldn't. The road was too narrow for a full U-turn with my trailer, and there was nowhere to back up safely. So I kept driving, telling myself I was just seeing things, that maybe it was just some old mannequin or something someone had put there as a joke. But then I passed another truck and another one after that, Each one looked older than the last, like they were arranged in some kind of timeline going backwards through the decades. There was a Kenworth from the 70s, an old Mack from the 60s, and even what looked like a vintage Freightliner that must have been from the 50s or earlier. All of them were positioned like their drivers had just casually pulled over and decided to stop forever. The rust was eating through their bodies, and some of them had plants growing up through their chassis, those same twisted, dead-looking plants I'd been seeing along the roadside. What really got to me was how perfect the spacing was between them, exactly the same distance apart, like someone had carefully placed them there with mathematical precision. The smell was getting worse now, seeping into my cab despite the recirculated air. It wasn't just musty anymore. It was the unmistakable stench of death, sweet and cloying and wrong in every possible way. I was breathing through my mouth, trying not to gag, when I passed close enough to one of the trucks to see clearly into the cab. What I saw there still wakes me up in cold sweats. The driver was still there all right, but it was just bones now, still wearing what was left of a flannel shirt and trucker cap. The skeleton was sitting upright in the driver's seat like he was still trying to drive, bony hands positioned on the steering wheel. His jaw was hanging open in what looked like a silent scream, and there were deep scratches in the dashboard and door panels, like he'd been clawing at them trying to get out. I couldn't look away, even though every instinct was screaming at me to floor it and get out of there. The thing that really messed with my head was that his logbook was still sitting open on the dashboard, pages yellow with age, but I could make out a date from 1987. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the engine noise, but no matter how fast I drove, more trucks kept appearing in my headlights, dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, stretching out along both sides of the road like some kind of graveyard for truckers. Each one had its own skeleton driver. Some slumped over their steering wheels, others sitting straight up like they were still waiting for traffic to clear. The newer trucks still had some paint left on them, but the older ones were just rust and metal bones. I saw a Peterbilt with a skeleton wearing a baseball cap that said "World's Greatest Grandpa," and an old International where the driver's bony fingers were still wrapped around a coffee mug. Some of the trucks had their doors hanging open, and I could see scratch marks on the inside of the cabs, deep gouges in the metal like these guys had tried everything to escape before they died. The worst part was their faces. Well, what was left of them. Every skull was turned toward the road, empty eye sockets staring out at the endless asphalt like they were still watching for something that never came. My truck was starting to act up too. The engine began sputtering and losing power, even though I'd just filled up back in Flagstaff and everything had been running fine. The dashboard lights started flickering and my speedometer needle was jumping around like it couldn't decide what speed I was going. I tried the radio again, desperate for any kind of human contact, but all I got was that same static mixed with what sounded like voices. Faint, distorted voices that seemed to be calling out numbers, like they were reading coordinates or maybe CB channel numbers. I grabbed my cell phone to call dispatch, but there was no signal at all, not even one bar. The screen kept flashing between no service and emergency calls only, but when I tried to dial 911, the call wouldn't go through. I was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped on this nightmare road with nothing but dead truckers. For company, the temperature gauge was starting to climb too, which made no sense because the night air was cool and I hadn't been pushing the engine that hard. Then I started noticing something that made my skin crawl even more than the skeletons. Some of the trucks weren't empty. I passed one where I could see a figure moving inside the cab. Just a shadow, but it was definitely moving back and forth, like someone pacing. When I slowed down to get a better look, the movement stopped and I swear I saw what looked like a face pressed against the passenger window, pale and distorted like it was underwater. I gunned it past that truck so fast my trailer started swaying, but in my side mirror I could see the cab door swing open and something dark step out onto the asphalt. I didn't look back after that. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight, and I was sweating even though the air conditioning was blasting. The engine was making noises I'd never heard before. This low, grinding sound mixed with a high-pitched whine that seemed to get louder every time I passed another truck. My fuel gauge was dropping way too fast too. I should have had at least half a tank left, but the needle was sitting just above empty. That's when I saw the truck that nearly made me lose my mind completely. It was a brand new Freightliner Cascadia, exactly like mine, same color, same company logos on the doors. Hell, it might have been the same model year, but there it sat on the shoulder like all the others, covered in that impossible rust and decay. I pulled up alongside it and looked into the cab, and my heart just about stopped. The skeleton inside was wearing the same company shirt I had on, the same style of trucker cap, even the same watch I wore on my left wrist. The logbook on his dashboard was open to a page dated 3 days from now, 3 days in the future, from when I was driving that night. Next to the logbook was a cell phone that looked exactly like mine, screen cracked but still glowing faintly with what looked like a text message. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see it was addressed to my wife's name. The skeleton's bony finger was pointing at something carved into the dashboard, and when I leaned closer to my passenger window, I could just make out letters scratched deep into the plastic. No exit, no escape, join us. I slammed on the brakes so hard my trailer jackknifed, and I had to fight to get control of the rig before it flipped. My whole body was shaking now, and I couldn't catch my breath. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, engine idling, staring at that truck that looked like it could have been mine. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that I was having some kind of breakdown or hallucination from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But I could smell that death stench getting stronger. And when I looked, in my mirrors, I could see more of those shadow figures climbing out of trucks behind me, moving toward my rig with that same underwater slowness. I threw the truck into gear and floored it, not caring anymore about safe driving or protecting my cargo. The engine screamed in protest, black smoke pouring from the exhaust stacks, but I kept my foot down. The trucks were flying past my windows, now in a blur of rust and bone, but they seemed to go on forever, stretching out into the darkness ahead like an infinite convoy of the dead. My truck was dying. I could feel it. The engine temperature was redlining, the oil pressure was dropping, and that grinding noise was getting so loud I could barely think. Steam started pouring out from under the hood, and I knew I had maybe minutes before the whole thing seized, up and left me stranded on this road with those things. That's when I saw it up ahead, a break in the endless line of dead trucks, just empty road stretching out into the darkness. I didn't question it, didn't slow down to think about it. I just aimed for that gap and prayed to every god I could think of that it would lead me back to the real world. As I got closer, I could see the landscape starting to change again. Those twisted dead trees were giving way to normal desert scrub, and the air coming through my vents didn't smell like death anymore. My radio crackled to life with a burst of static, then clear as day, I heard a DJ announcing the time and weather. My cell phone started beeping with missed messages, and my GPS flickered back to showing actual roads and mile markers. When I finally saw a real highway sign, Interstate 40, Flagstaff 127 miles, I pulled over at the first truck stop I could find and just sat there shaking for an hour. My logbook showed I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, but according to my watch and the clock on my phone, only 2 hours had passed since I'd taken that detour. The weird thing was, my fuel tank was completely empty, like I'd driven those 8 hours worth of miles, even though time said otherwise. I called my dispatcher to report my location, and he was confused because according to his tracking system, my truck had been sitting stationary for the past 2 hours with no GPS signal. When I tried to explain what happened, he just assumed I'd fallen asleep at a rest stop and was making up the story to cover for being behind schedule. I didn't blame him. I wouldn't have believed it either if someone told me the same thing. I filled up my tank, checked my engine, and everything was running perfectly normal again, like nothing had ever been wrong. That was 3 years ago, and I still drive trucks, but I've never taken another unmarked detour since then. I've tried looking up that road on every map I can find, satellite images, county records, everything, but there's no record of any road in that area that matches what I remember. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving through Arizona, I'll see what looks like an unmarked turnoff in my headlights, and my heart starts racing. I always keep driving straight, no matter how much time it might save me. A few months after it happened, I was at a truck stop in New Mexico and overheard 2 other drivers talking about getting lost on some weird road in Arizona, describing trucks with skeletons in them. When I tried to join their conversation, they clammed up and walked away, like they didn't want to talk about it anymore. I still wonder sometimes if I really made it out of there, or if I'm just another skeleton sitting in a rusted truck, dreaming that I escaped while some other poor driver sees me in his headlights and tries to figure out what the hell is going on.